They could not even get my name right on the termination notice after 18 years. Carter 1L. Not Carter. Not the man who had built half their infrastructure, recovered their systems during the blackout crash of 2012, and wrote the onboarding guide they still hand to new hires. Just Michael Carter. A single typo. That careless keystroke told me everything about how they viewed me now. Jason Miller slid a folder across the desk like he was passing me a takeout menu. He never lifted his eyes. Beside him, Karen Johnson from HR sat stiff and rehearsed, her smile thin, her words too polished. Another person sat in the corner, legal, I guessed, though I did not ask. "We are restructuring," Jason said finally, his tone flat, like the words had been chewed and spit out before they reached me. "Your role has been deemed no longer aligned with our future direction." Misalignment, that was their word for it. I gave a single nod. No blinking. No questions. I picked up the folder, closed it without reading beyond the heading, and slid it into my battered laptop bag, the same one I had carried since 2009. No protests. No pleading. I stood slowly, tightened the strap across my shoulder. Jason finally looked up then. His eyes flickered. He had been expecting begging, anger, or tears. He had no idea who I was. Outside the office, the hallway felt heavy, or maybe I was just now realizing the weight of being erased. The floor was too quiet for 9 o'clock in the morning. Cubicles glowed faintly with monitor light, keyboards clicking softly. No one made eye contact. A few glanced up, then pretended to dive back into fake emails. I did not blame them. I had trained half of them, showed them how to query outdated Oracle systems when the cloud went down, sat with them at coffee breaks, shared photos of Emily's 10th birthday trophy. Now I was untouchable. My desk was on the 4th floor, northeast corner, beside the drafty window. On good days, you could catch the skyline. On muggy days, only fog. My chair creaked like always. The N key on the keyboard still worn from when I spilled coffee years ago and scrubbed it with a toothbrush. The cactus on the shelf leaned farther than usual. The soil dry. I had only 3 personal items worth taking. A framed picture of Emily on her 10th birthday, clutching a science trophy nearly her size. A chipped ceramic mug that read "World's Okayest Dad." And a brass compass, heavy and real, once owned by my grandfather, a Navy engineer. He always told me, when you cannot trust the map, follow true north. I packed them into the bag quietly. The silence around me said more than words. Then Ashley Brooks from marketing appeared at the corner of my cubicle. Her lipstick was uneven, probably applied in the elevator. "Mike," she whispered. "I just heard. They're really letting you go?" I nodded. "This is insane," she muttered, eyes darting down the hall. "You practically built this floor." "It's not about building," I said softly. "It's about replacing." Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but she stopped herself. She placed a hand briefly on my shoulder, then left. When I looked up, I saw Jason Miller watching from his doorway, arms folded. He was not even trying to pretend. I passed him without slowing. His face showed nothing, no victory, no regret. Just vacancy, as though I was already filed away under past. At reception, Jessica Reed blinked when I handed her my badge. "Effective immediately?" she asked. "Apparently," I replied. She hesitated, then slid the card into her drawer. "You were always decent, Mr. Carter. Some upstairs people forget too fast." I gave her a small nod and stepped outside. The Cleveland sky was low and gray. A breeze carried the smell of mulch from landscapers. I walked to my car slowly, like leaving a funeral. I sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. Through the windshield, I stared up at Brighton Technologies, 12 floors of glass and fluorescent light. I had started there when it was barely 2.5 floors in a shared tech park off Jefferson Avenue. Back then, we were fighting to keep servers from overheating. Payroll lived in Excel. My desk was wedged between a dead printer and a pile of routers. On my first day, I stayed until midnight fixing a billing crash nobody else had tested for. Nobody asked me to. I just knew how. That was my life for 18 years. I just knew how. And now I was gone. I reached over to the glove box and snapped it open. Inside sat a small black USB drive on a keyring. To anyone else, it was just plastic and metal. To me, it was what I call my insurance. The company handbook had always forbidden taking data off-site. But years earlier, after a phishing attack that had leaked client information, legal had asked me to create an early warning system. Logs, backups, forensic tracking. I told them it required mirror data outside the main network if they wanted real transparency. They signed off, then promptly forgot. But I never did. I had kept everything. Meeting recordings, access logs, audit histories, emails no one was ever supposed to see. While management was busy patting themselves on the back for going agile, I was noticing who was shutting off audit trails and who was quietly rerouting approvals. I had seen enough to know Brighton Technologies had rot spreading through the walls. And I started digging. Not for payback, not at the time. Just curiosity. Now, they had cut me loose without revoking half my old credentials, without reclaiming my devices, without asking what I still carried. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed. I stared at the glass tower glowing in the morning light. To them, I was just another IT guy laid off, forgettable, replaceable. But the man they fired was the same man who built the vault, and he still had the only spare key. I turned the ignition. Wednesday was going to be different. Most folks in that office thought of me as the quiet one. Not shy, not awkward. Just the guy who fixed things and only spoke when something was already solved. They were not entirely wrong. I had always let my work do the talking. Somewhere along the line, people stopped listening. That's the curse of quiet men. They fade from notice. And when you are invisible, you see everything. I drove home with the windows rolled down. The October air cut sharp against my face, carrying with it the last scraps of loyalty I had not admitted were gone. Our house sat at the end of a dead-end street in Westfield, hidden behind a row of pine trees that had stood stubborn for 25 years, surviving every storm. I had not fared as well. Sarah's car was already in the driveway. She always came home from her teaching job by 3:20 unless it was parent-teacher week. I checked the clock, 3:42. She would know. The garage door groaned open, humming its tired song after 14 years. I pulled in, shut the engine, and lingered for a moment, letting the radio chatter to no one. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and lemon cleaner. Sarah stood at the kitchen island, grating a stack of papers with one hand and holding a mug of tea in the other. She glanced up. Whatever was on my face told her everything. She said nothing, just slid her pen aside, poured another cup, and pushed it toward me. I took it. Bad? She asked softly. I nodded. How bad? Gone. She did not blink. The word just hung in the air between us, steam rising from the mugs. She had seen me through all of it. Layoffs during the dot-com bust we barely avoided. Years of late nights when I smelled like server room dust. She knew the weight of gone better than anyone. I sat across from her. They couldn't even look me in the eyes, Sarah. She reached across the counter, her hand strong, warm, steady. You were the best thing that place ever had, she said. I said nothing, not because I disagreed, but because a part of me wondered if being the best ever mattered to anyone but her. That night I could not sleep. Around 1:45 a.m., I padded barefoot across the cool tiles into the small office behind the laundry room. I switched on the desk lamp, just enough to keep from waking the house. At the bottom drawer of the old file cabinet, behind tax records and Emily's old school awards, sat a steel lockbox. The code turned by muscle memory. Inside lay 3 USB drives, labeled not with names, but with color codes only I understood. I slid the first one into the port. The system woke up like a dog recognizing its master. I had not touched those files in over a year, not because they weren't important, but because I had convinced myself I would never need them. Now, everything was different. I clicked open a folder marked Blackbird Archive. It started a little over 2 years back, when I noticed a strange pattern buried in the admin logs. Nothing that screamed trouble at first, just a deleted access record here, a small shift in invoice approvals there. The kind of mess you chalk up to human error. But the longer I watched, the less it felt like random noise. About a year and a half earlier, Mark Ellison pushed hard on this idea of streamlining user roles. Too many dormant accounts, he said. Too many overlaps. What he really meant was me. That same month, I was quietly pulled from the procurement routing list. Not deactivated outright, just slowly erased from the threads I had been part of for years. Vendor renewals, infrastructure requests, license extensions, suddenly I saw none of it. They told me it was a permission sync issue. I did not push back. I just logged it all. Because while they were trying to cut me out, I was already mapping everything around them. A week later, a new vendor appeared in the system, Ironwood Solutions Group. I had never seen a contract, never saw a kickoff email, just invoices, clean, processed, paid. When I checked their listed office, it was nothing but a rented mailbox in a strip mall outside Knoxville. At first, I figured it was laziness or sloppy records. Then I ran the domain. The website had been spun up 4 days before the first invoice. The billing contact was an encrypted Gmail, but the metadata tied back to a Daniel Foster, cousin of Stephen Carver, our CFO. That was the moment curiosity shifted into caution. The very next morning, Mark called me into his office. That was unusual. Our conversations were normally hallway nods or clipped exchanges. That day, though, he was all smiles. He asked if I would be interested in res-killing into some advisory support role, something better aligned with emerging tech stacks. I asked what would happen to my current responsibilities. "We are decentralizing," he said. That was the moment I knew it was not a move. It was an erasure. I nodded, told him I would think about it, and went home to start building a shadow copy of everything they assumed lived only inside that 10-story tower. Every backup, every vendor entry, every single change log. They thought I was just another systems guy. What they never understood was that by then, I had quietly become the system itself. One Monday about a year back, I came in before dawn. The coffee machine was still cold. Something felt off. The system wasn't broken, just sluggish. Timestamps were 2 hours behind. I traced it back to a permissions loop, likely set up to speed a payment test. A back door had been left open. It had been used 4 times. Each time, someone had rerouted vendor payments. I sealed the hole, logged the event, and waited. I told no one, because sometimes the best way to catch a leak is to let it drip just long enough. From then on, I became the office ghost. Mark talked over me in meetings. Stephen ignored direct questions. Karen Miles from HR gave me that pity smile like I was already halfway retired. Even the younger engineers, the ones I mentored, stopped coming by. They got pulled into closed-door meetings with Mark and Stephen instead, and I stayed silent. Not because I was weak, but because they were not ready for the truth I had. The betrayal did not happen the day they fired me. It had happened months before, but I let them believe I was outdated, irrelevant, forgettable. I let them bury me alive in my own office. And while they dug, I was laying the foundation for something else, something they never saw coming. A quiet reckoning. Not revenge. Not even justice. Just clarity. Sitting now in my small home office, with drives full of shadows and a mind packed with timestamps, I realized the one truth they had always missed. They thought no one was watching, but they forgot that the quiet man in the corner was the one who built the very room they were robbing from. Things do not always fall apart because you pull hard. Sometimes they collapse because a single loose thread finally shifts. For me, it happened on a late Wednesday. I remember the sunlight slanting gold through the blinds on the 3rd floor server annex. It was that in-between hour when the building fell silent, when emails slowed, when Slack threads turned into weekend plans. Most of the office had already slipped out for happy hour. I stayed as always, not because I had no place else to be, but because in those quiet, empty hours, the system spoke loudest. That night, I was running a basic maintenance scan on the archive server. Nothing flashy, just checking logs, scanning for redundancy gaps. And that is when the shadows started talking. Most of the time, my work was repetitive, the kind of routine checks you could do half asleep. But that day, something flickered. A batch of vendor invoices didn't match up. Not because the math was off. If anything, it was too perfect. Every number was rounded, polished, with no variance, no messy adjustments. That was what made me stop. The vendor was listed as Stonebridge Technologies, LLC. I frowned. Never heard of them. Not on our preferred vendor list. Not buried in the legacy folders. Not even in the acquisition contracts I had personally managed up until a few months before. I opened their earliest invoice, dated a year back. A $6,400 payment labeled Infrastructure Optimization Phase 1. I tried to cross-check it with a project ID. Nothing. The next invoice? $7,900. Then $9,500. Month after month, the numbers climbed in a neat, almost rhythmic pattern. The descriptions were vague corporate nonsense. Efficiency review, licensing streamlining, network improvement consulting. Buzzwords built to slide through the automated approval system without anyone blinking. I opened a new spreadsheet and began logging each entry myself. 17 payments, all perfectly timed. Each one signed off by a junior finance staffer from Stephen Carver's department. I ran a check on the domain. Registered 13 months back. The listed office? A UPS mailbox on the south side of Denton. That was the first real thread to pull. The next step wasn't technical, it was human. I started watching people. Stephen, the CFO, had never been warm, but lately he was edgy, avoiding the halls. Meetings he used to attend in person, he now phoned into, even when he was sitting 2 floors away. His assistant, Rachel, suddenly shuffled her calendar twice in 1 week, canceling recurring finance syncs without explanation. Odd. And then there was Mark Ellison, my old boss. He was practically living in Stephen's office, dropping by unannounced, no calendar invites, no meeting notes. Just short, closed-door chats. But the real giveaway was what never happened. Normally, whenever a new vendor came on board, even a minor one like office cleaning, there was a Slack channel announcement, a cheesy welcome aboard message, some forced blurb about partnership. But Stonebridge? Nothing. Not a single word. That was when I knew this wasn't sloppy bookkeeping. This was concealment. I dug deeper. Every Stonebridge invoice flowed through a hidden approval group buried in the finance system under the label FinX42. Once I cracked it open, more names spilled out. Clearline Data Group, North Star Advisory Partners, Ironwood Consulting. Different names, same rhythm, same invoice template, same mailbox addresses. All registered under anonymous LLCs out of Montana, Arizona, and Oregon. And each tied back, through metadata, LinkedIn crumbs, or public filings, to Stephen Carver's extended family. Cousins, in-laws, even a golfing buddy he had tagged in a vacation photo back in 2020. It was slick. Technically, nothing was fake. Services were billed, payments were approved. But the numbers were bloated, the work redundant, and sometimes, nothing at all was delivered. They had been bleeding the company for over 3 years, right under everyone's nose. Except mine. By the time I discovered all this, I was already fired. My access was mostly gone. But the mirrored backups, the retention logs, the forensic trails, they were mine. Not stolen. Every file existed because 5 years earlier, the board had asked me to build a compliance safety net after a breach. They signed off, then forgot about it. I did not. So I pulled out the red drive, the one I hadn't touched in over 18 months. Inside, neat folders held untouched metadata, timestamped approvals, PDFs with trails no one else had bothered to examine. I remember sitting there, the cursor blinking, the words Stonebridge Technologies lit on the screen. I didn't feel rage. I felt sharp, like the lens had finally come into focus. The next morning, Andrea noticed. We were on the porch with coffee when she said, "You're different." "Am I?" I asked. "You're calm, but not the usual kind." I stared out at the pine line across the yard. Sometimes the thing you've been preparing for quietly your whole life shows up exactly when it's supposed to. She didn't press. She never did. That evening, I made a call. David Monroe, an old contact. A decade ago, he'd been the firm's external auditor. Back then, we had pulled late nights together patching up a compliance disaster left behind by a crooked CFO. He'd since moved on, semi-retired at a bigger outfit, but still picked up my calls. He answered on the second ring. "That thing you hinted at back in 2022? "Worse," I answered. "Then tell me what you've got. I'd rather show you in person tomorrow. Somewhere private. I know a place." That meeting, and everything that came after, would one day end up sealed inside an affidavit. But that night, I was just laying the groundwork. I arranged everything in order, neat and undeniable. A timeline so tight it could not be dismissed. This wasn't just about missing money. It was about a system. The creation of shell companies. Quiet tweaks to approval chains. Real expenses funneled into fake fronts. Oversight stripped away piece by piece, starting with me. Here's the part they never understood. You can cut a job title, you can shut down an account, but you can't erase memory. And I was the memory. I hadn't kept records out of paranoia. I kept them because someone had to care. And if no one else would, then I was the last line standing. As I shut my laptop that night, I thought of Lily. She was 26 now, building her own career as an analyst. I hadn't told her I was out of work yet. I didn't want to worry her. But when the truth came crashing down, and it would, I wanted her to know one thing. When it mattered, I didn't stay silent. Fraud doesn't wear a ski mask. It doesn't break windows. It walks right through the lobby with a tie on and a wedding band. The next day, after meeting with David, I sat in my home office. A lukewarm thermos of coffee sat by my brass compass, the arrow not pointing anywhere useful. I didn't need it anymore. I knew exactly where I was heading. I dug deeper into the Stonebridge Technologies folder. People think shell companies are clever webs spun by hackers overseas. Hollywood nonsense. In reality, they're boring, predictable. The incorporation papers showed Stonebridge registered in Montana. No surprise, that state thrives on corporate secrecy. But buried in the original paperwork, one line caught my eye: registered agent J.P. Carver. The name hit me hard. I had seen it before. Almost 2 years earlier, during a finance presentation, a slide had briefly shown our CFO's full legal name, Stephen Carver Wilcox. At the time, I dismissed the Carver part as a clerical slip. But now it clicked. Stephen had a sister, Patricia Carver, married name. Her husband? Jonathan Paul Carver. J.P. Carver, the registered agent. The signature stamped across every vendor file. I froze on that screen. This wasn't one man dipping into company funds. This was a family operation, a network of relatives shielding each other with silence and structure. I grabbed a notebook and started drawing connections. Stonebridge Technologies, run by J.P. Carver, brother-in-law to Stephen. Clearline Data Group, tied to a shell holding registered under Patricia. North Star Advisory Partners, mailing address linked to a rental cabin business owned by Patricia's cousin. Every company billed Stratton for consulting or efficiency reviews. Every invoice used recycled language, the same slow inflation over time. Careful, measured, always just under the radar of an automated audit. And then came the final name, Ironwood Strategies. Only 2 small entries, $2, $704,100. But the metadata told a different story. The remittance email, logged automatically by the finance system, was copied to an address ending in @brighteststrategy.com, the domain, registered to someone named Logan Ellison. Ellison, as in Mark Ellison, my old boss. I checked 3 times. It wasn't his direct work email, but the recovery number tied to the domain was his office phone. The lock clicked open in my head. Stephen wasn't alone. Mark was in on it. And suddenly it all made sense. They hadn't pushed me out because I was old-fashioned or inefficient. They pushed me out because I still knew where to look. Their first mistake? Assuming I hadn't noticed. Their second? Not cutting me off fast enough. But their worst mistake of all? They thought I wanted back in. That this was still about a paycheck. I sat there, staring at the screen, thinking of the holidays I'd skipped for server migrations. The hospital bed where I once fixed an outage with enforced still in my arm. And all the times I gave pieces of my life to a company that now wanted me erased. I kept thinking about the irony. The same people now scrambling to hide their mess were the ones I had trained years ago. I thought of Emily, just 13 at the time, asking me why I never blew up at work like some of her friends' dads did. I had laughed and told her anger didn't get the job done in my world. And it was true. Anger was useless. But clarity? Clarity was everything. And I had never been clearer in my life. For 3 straight days, I built what I called the master file. Every invoice, every approval chain, every ownership record. Screenshots, metadata, routing logs, laid out with a clean timeline that traced the changes across IT and finance. I even built a node map of the Wilcox family's entire setup, every tie in black and white. Nothing left to guesswork. No maybe, or probably. Just undeniable links. By the time I finished, the picture showed over $9 million drained out in inflated consulting fees over 30 months, all routed to shell companies tied to relatives of one man. On page 27, I pasted a quote from Stephen Carver at the last town hall. Transparency is the foundation of resilience. I highlighted it in bright yellow. Let the board choke on the irony. But I wasn't stopping there. I wrote up a controlled leak. Nothing wild, just enough bait. An anonymous email addressed to Mark Ellison, copied to Stephen Carver and the finance director. No blind copy. Subject line, vendor onboarding discrepancies. Immediate attention required. The body? Vague, professional, mentioning overlapping vendor activity, billing inconsistencies, and a pending compliance inquiry. Just enough to light the fuse. Within 3 hours, the reaction came. 2 missed calls from Mark. I didn't pick up. Then a direct Gmail from Stephen himself. What exactly have you found? Can we talk privately? I answered with 5 words. I'm just getting started organizing. Then, silence. The next call wasn't from either of them. It was from Janet in HR. Her voice shook. Raymond, I was told to remind you about the NDA you signed. I didn't sign anything, I said flatly. Well, your severance. I was terminated without warning. If you want me to sign something, send it over. I don't owe you a thing. Raymond, I'd advise. I hung up. That night, my phone buzzed with a message from Megan, Steven's assistant. She'd always been decent to me, even once brought me coffee during an all-night blackout. Now her text read, they're panicking. I saw Mark slam a door. Something's coming. Please be careful. I didn't reply. Instead, I encrypted 3 copies of the report, one to my secure cloud, one to David Monroe, and one I printed. That hard copy I sealed in an envelope addressed to Charles Donovan, head of Stratton's audit committee. Old school, but I knew the man. He had zero tolerance for excuses. He'd read every word. The next morning, I dropped the envelope into an express courier box. And as it slid away, something shifted inside me. It wasn't victory. Not yet. It was momentum. Later that day, Andrea found me in the garage, standing over the workbench, staring at nothing. She leaned against the doorframe. You look like you're waiting for something, she said. I am. You still don't want to set fire to the whole thing? I smiled faintly. No, I want them to set fire to themselves. It started small. A subject line. No accusations, no threats. Just a whisper in a hallway full of locked doors. Financial irregularities. Internal inquiry suggested. I sent it at precisely 9:15 a.m. Wednesday. From an internal-looking address I had built years ago during a phishing simulation. Not on any distribution list. Invisible to most filters. But authenticated. Real enough to slip past. Terrifyingly real to those who knew what it meant. The body was brief. Clinical. Recurring vendor discrepancies found in archived financial logs. Routing patterns suggest deliberate inflation. Recommend immediate audit to prevent external exposure. No names. No attachments. But I left one breadcrumb. Invoice number X72813. Stonebridge Technologies, May 17th. At 9:41, my phone rang. Mark. Raymond, we need to talk. I don't know what this is, but let's not escalate. Call me, please. At 9:52, a second call. This time Steven. I let it ring. At 10:10, an email arrived. From Janet. The same woman who couldn't even look me in the eye the day they threw me out. The email from HR landed like a dull thud. We have been made aware of communication that may violate your separation terms. Please avoid contact with current employees and remember your signed confidentiality clauses. Except I had not signed a damn thing. No NDA, no release. Not even the severance packet they had scrambled to shove in my inbox the night they cut me loose. My finger hovered over reply. Then I stopped. No, not yet. They expected me to panic. What they were not ready for was patience. Around noon, I drove to my bank in Buckhead. I had rented a safe deposit box there 2 years back under my grandfather's name, a safety net I never thought I would use. Inside sat an older backup, hard copies of policy memos, signed approvals, raw server logs. And tucked inside, a small flash drive labeled in my handwriting, Contingency Level 3. That drive carried the smoking gun. It showed Stephen Carver himself had requested vendor routing changes just 2 weeks before the very first invoice from Stonebridge Technologies. He used an admin login that was supposed to have been deactivated years earlier. He had never shut it down. Sloppy, desperate, and now, undeniable. That night, my phone buzzed with a message from Daniel Brooks, one of the junior engineers I had trained years back. They're scrambling. Emergency meetings everywhere. People look scared. What's happening? I typed back one line, don't get involved. Just watch. By Thursday morning, I brewed a strong pot of coffee and sat at my desk. This time, I was not combing through logs. I was building a timeline, day by day, approval by approval, invoice by invoice. Vendor payments lined up with calendar edits, budget increases paired with quiet meeting notes. Then I found it, buried in an old project folder called Digital Evolution Strategy. A slide deck drafted by Mark Ellison. One slide listed modernization partners, including Harborline Consulting. The same front I had traced back to a burner domain linked to Mark's own work phone. But the next slide hit harder. A chart of security realignment, listing key roles marked for removal as part of compliance restructuring. My name sat under a column labeled Legacy Resource, Scheduled Decommission. They had not just fired me. They had plotted it, piece by piece, to clear the path for their scheme. By 2 o'clock, I had it all. I could have dumped the files right then, emailed the board, called a journalist, even walked into headquarters with a folder under each arm. But that would have made it personal. And this was never about me. It was about the system rotting from within. So instead, I scheduled an email. Delivery, 8 a.m. Friday. Recipients, every single member of Fairmont Systems Board, including Charles Donovan, head of the Audit Committee. The attachment, a 36-page PDF titled Audit Trail, Executive Vendor Fraud. A web of financial ties between Carver's family and shell vendors. IP traces pointing back to Mark Ellison. A final page with escalation channels listed, IRS, SEC, DOJ. And at the bottom, one cold line. Submitted under Fairmont Policy STR 406B, subsection 8. Fraud reporting by former authorized personnel. That evening, Karen leaned against the door of my office, arms folded. "You're ready?" she asked. "I am." "Want to talk about it?" "No." She studied me. "Do you feel better?" I thought for a moment. "Not better. Just necessary." Friday morning, 7:58 a.m. I sat on the porch with coffee, watching sunlight break through the pines. At exactly 8 o'clock, the email launched. I did not refresh. I did not check replies. I just let it go. At 8:17, my phone rang. Unknown number. I ignored it. 8:23, another call. Then another. Then came the texts. "Ray, what did you do?" "Mark's locked in his office. Steven's calling legal." They pulled everyone into the boardroom. At 9:07, Daniel again. "Police just showed up." I did not smile. Not yet. By 10:42, I felt it. Not in the trees, not in the sky, but in the shift of silence itself. The phone no longer rang. It vibrated, restless. Small detail, but I had built my life on noticing details others ignored. I stepped inside. Karen was on a Zoom call, nodding as though life was still normal. But it wasn't. I walked back to the office. The monitor flicked awake instantly, like it had been waiting for me. No passwords, no prompts. Just readiness. I opened a secure browser and typed in the address for a forgotten sandbox environment I had built years back for penetration tests. Most accounts had long been retired. Except mine. CSK Legacy. And just like that, the game shifted again. The backdoor account was hidden deep in the training framework, buried so far down it never appeared on the Active Directory and was immune to the auto-lockouts. Nobody remembered it. Nobody had revoked it. I logged in. Just like that, I was inside again. Not as staff, not as an ex-employee, as a ghost. I bypassed the dashboard and went straight for the mail server. From there, I queued up a new message. This time it wouldn't be anonymous. It would carry my name in bold at the top. Subject, before you approve Q3 bonuses. Read this. Delivery, 8 a.m. Monday. No attachments this time. Just a single secure link to an external archive, locked with a password only the board could use. Inside, every file, every invoice, every audit log I'd collected across 11 months. And at the end, a 90-second screen capture showing Stephen Carver's credentials authorizing Stonebridge Technologies invoices, while his VPN pinged from his private beach house in South Carolina. A weekend he'd sworn under oath to be at a finance summit in Chicago. When the job was done, I logged out. Closed the system. For good. At 12:05, a knock echoed at the front door. Karen answered. She returned holding a folded piece of stationery. "No name," she said quietly. He just handed it to me. The handwriting leaned forward, pressed hard into the paper. "Let's talk. It doesn't have to go this way." I tore the note in half. By 2 o'clock, the first ripples hit the market forums. The headlines were tentative. Fairmont Systems under internal review, sources say. An hour later, the headlines sharpened. Fairmont CFO linked to vendor irregularities. At 3:15 p.m., my phone lit up. Charles Donovan. "Ray," he said without preamble. His voice was tight, deliberate. "You lit the fuse. You read the report?" I asked. "Twice. And it's worse than I ever expected." He exhaled slowly. "Mark's screaming about a smear job. Stephen won't answer his phone. The board has suspended them both." A pause. "And we want to meet you. Monday morning. Officially." Saturday, a FedEx envelope landed on my porch. Inside, a formal letter requesting my attendance at an emergency board session. At the bottom, a scrawled line in Donovan's hand. They finally know who you are. Sunday drifted by like a deep exhale. I sat on the porch most of the day. Karen joined me after dinner, barefoot, glass of wine in her hand. You look calm, she said. Do I? You're not angry anymore. No, I said softly. Just patient. Monday morning, 8 a.m. sharp. The scheduled email fired. 10 board members received a single folder, 42 exhibits, and a visual map tying Carver and Ellison to every shell company and every stolen cent. No commentary. No speech. The facts would speak louder than I ever could. By 9:32, my phone buzzed. Daniel Brooks, one of the engineers I had mentored years ago. Police are here. Carver and Ellison separated. Whole floor on lockdown. What did you do? I didn't respond. At 10:03, the elevator door slid open with a soft chime. I had never once set foot on the executive floor in 17 years at Fairmont Systems. I had lived my career in the basement, among servers and cables, in rooms no one else cared about. Now I stood beneath a chandelier that cost more than my yearly bonus, staring at a hallway lined with hollow mission statements. A young assistant, barely older than my daughter, approached. Mr. Keller? She asked softly. I nodded. They're waiting for you. The boardroom door swung open. 10 directors sat around a walnut table polished to a mirror sheen. At the far end, Charles Donovan gave me a single nod. Beside him, interim CEO Elaine Porter, her eyes shadowed, her hands clasped, the weight of the company now on her shoulders. Mr. Keller, she said, her voice steady though her face betrayed exhaustion. Thank you for coming. I sat, quietly. She glanced at the folder in front of her. The information you've provided is staggering. I clicked the link. There it was. Screenshots from panicked employees, HR scrambling, legal drafting pre-written statements, department heads expressing confusion, engineers sharing encrypted folders in back channels with comments like, "We always knew something felt off. He told us 3 years ago." Ree was right. I closed the laptop and looked out the window. Atlanta was warm that day. The sky was unbothered by what was unfolding beneath it. Justice doesn't arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it comes wearing silence and leaves with respect. By Thursday, Stratton Technologies had released a formal internal bulletin. Effective immediately, Mr. Raymond Keller has assumed the role of Chief Integrity Officer, reporting directly to the Board of Directors. An independent investigation has confirmed systemic misuse of corporate funds by former executives. Legal proceedings are underway. The company expresses deep gratitude to Mr. Keller for his integrity, diligence, and unwavering service. No mention of whistleblower, no sensationalism, just facts. Clean, cold, professional, exactly how I wanted it. That night, Andrea found me on the back porch again. You're quiet, she said. I always was. She handed me a cup of tea, sat beside me. You don't seem satisfied. I'm not here for satisfaction. Then what are you here for? I watched the shadows on the lawn stretch out and disappear into the dark to make sure no one else has to carry what I carried alone. Friday came with consequences. Howard was formally indicted. Bryce was arrested at his home. Phillips's passport was flagged at Sao Paulo International. News outlets picked up the story. One headline stood out to me. Stratton IT veteran quietly exposes 5.2M fraud executives fall like dominoes. I didn't read the article. I had lived it. Inside the office, things changed. Not overnight, but noticeably. People looked me in the eye again, not out of fear, but out of something rarer, respect. They passed me in the hall with nods, not whispers. The same engineers who once looked through me now looked to me. I didn't give speeches. I didn't host town halls. But I sent one email to the entire company, just one. Integrity is not an initiative. It's a position you hold whether or not you're being watched. No signature, no title, just words. That weekend, I finally told Lily everything. We sat at a diner, her favorite, the same booth we used to share when she was in middle school. She listened quietly, nodding, asking a few questions. When I finished, she said one thing. I'm proud of you. And that meant more than the new title, more than the office, more than any number in a contract. It meant I hadn't become what they were. It was Sunday morning. No alarms, no meetings, just the sound of a distant lawn mower somewhere down the block, and the soft clink of Andrea stirring her tea in the next room. The house was so quiet it felt like the air had weight. I sat by the kitchen window with a yellow legal pad, the kind I used to scribble on back in the early days before everything went digital. Back then, paper made thoughts feel real, traceable, harder to delete. Andrea glanced over from the living room, where she was curled up on the couch with her book. She didn't ask what I was doing. We had reached a rhythm of silence that didn't demand explanation. It had been 3 weeks since the report. 3 weeks since I returned to Stratton, not as the discarded technician, but as the man holding the keys. And yet, despite the boardroom offers and the headlines and the arrests, something inside me still felt unfinished. Not unsettled, not bitter, just incomplete, like the door had been closed, but not locked. I flipped the legal pad open, wrote the word closure at the top, then stared at it for 5 full minutes. That's when I knew I wasn't going to find it there. Not in bullet points, not in court documents, but maybe in a final word. So I turned to my laptop, opened a new email draft, and typed slowly, not editing as I went to Executive Team Audit Committee Legal Counsel subject on integrity and the quiet things. I never planned to be here. I didn't spend 17 years at Stratton Technologies to catch thieves or build a new title or hold anyone accountable. I was hired to fix systems. And over time, I became part of one that stopped asking questions. I was called legacy before I was ever called necessary. I was excluded before I was ever heard. And in my silence, I saw everything. Not because I was watching, but because no one thought I could still see. People don't set out to destroy the places they build. But when those places forget who built them, the rot begins slowly, quietly, behind layers of process and performance reviews. You didn't just remove a man. You removed memory, context, judgment. And because of that, the cracks widened. I don't send this as a warning. I send it as a record so that what happened here won't be rewritten as a footnote or worse, as a disruption we overcame. You didn't overcome anything. Someone just stayed long enough to pick up the pieces you didn't see falling. That someone was me. I'll be at my desk tomorrow. Not because I want to lead, but because someone has to hold the line until the day I'm not needed. R. Keller, I didn't proofread it, didn't style it, just hit send. No reply came. I clicked the link and there it was, screenshots spilling across the screen. HR in chaos, lawyers drafting canned responses, managers whispering confusion, engineers trading encrypted files in hidden channels with comments like, "We always knew something was wrong. He warned us years ago." Keller was right. I shut the laptop and turned toward the window. Atlanta's heat pressed against the glass, the sky calm, untouched by the storm unraveling below. Justice rarely arrives with trumpets. More often, it shows up quiet, steady, leaving behind nothing but respect. By Thursday, Stratton Technologies issued a stark internal bulletin. Effective immediately, Raymond Keller had been appointed Chief Integrity Officer, reporting directly to the board. Independent investigators confirmed years of systemic fraud. Legal actions were moving forward. The language was sterile, no mention of whistleblowers, no theatrics. Exactly the way I wanted it. That evening, Andrea found me on the porch. "You're quiet," she said. "I always have been." She handed me tea and sat close. "You don't look satisfied." "I'm not here for satisfaction." "Then what are you here for?" I watched the shadows stretch across the lawn. "To make sure no one else carries this weight alone." Friday brought consequences. Howard was indicted. Bryce pulled from his home in cuffs. Phillips's passport flagged before he could vanish overseas. News outlets plastered headlines. IT veteran uncovers $5. 2 million fraud. Executives fall like dominoes. I never read the articles. I had lived the story. Inside Stratton, things shifted. Slowly but enough. People met my eyes again, not out of fear, but respect. Nods replaced whispers. The same engineers who once ignored me now sought me out. I gave no speeches, no town halls. Just one email. Integrity is not a program. It's a choice you hold, even when nobody is watching. No signature. No title. Just words. That weekend, I finally told Lily everything. We sat in her favorite diner, the same booth we used when she was in middle school. She listened quietly, then said only, "I'm proud of you." That meant more than the office, the title, or any contract. It meant I hadn't become like the men I fought. Sunday morning came with no alarms, no meetings, just the hum of a lawn mower down the block and Andrea stirring her tea in the next room. The silence felt heavy, almost physical. I sat by the window with an old yellow legal pad, the kind I once used before everything went digital. I wrote one word at the top, closure, then stared at it, knowing I wouldn't find it there. Not in notes, not in verdicts. Maybe only in a final message. I opened my laptop and began typing to the board and audit committee. Subject: on integrity and the quiet things. I wrote without editing. I never came here to hunt thieves or hold titles. I was hired to repair systems, and over time I became part of one that forgot to ask questions. They called me outdated before they ever called me necessary. They ignored me before they ever listened. And in that silence, I saw everything. Not because I was searching, but because nobody thought I still could. When you remove people, you also strip away memory, judgment, context. And in that emptiness, rot spreads. You did not just discard a man. You discarded the eyes that kept watch. I write this not as a warning, but as a record. So the truth is not rewritten into a footnote or dismissed as a bump the company overcame. You did not overcome it. Someone stayed to pick up the pieces you refused to see breaking. That someone was me. Tomorrow, I'll be at my desk. Not because I crave leadership, but because someone must hold the line until the day the system finally holds itself. R. Keller. I pressed send without rereading. The screen stayed quiet. No reply came. Not that day, and not the next. But on Monday, something changed in the office. The silence in the hallway was different, and when the new HR director, young, energetic, and a whiz at PowerPoint presentations and corporate assessments, stopped mid-step when she saw me, she said, "Mr. Keller, I read what you sent." I just nodded. "Then you know where to start." She blinked in surprise. "Start with what? Cleaning?" And walked away. At 10:30, Stephen appeared. As usual, he didn't knock, but hung in the doorway, as if afraid to ask a question. "I read it too," he said. I was silent. He went into the office and added, "You know, I've often brushed off your words about audit logs and log files. Honestly, I thought you were being overly cautious." I looked up at him. "But you were right," he finished quietly. "You're the only one who took this seriously." I nodded. "You know what the first line of real security is?" I asked. He waited. "Boredom," I said. "A job that no one appreciates, that doesn't protect you from applause." Stephen smiled faintly. "Get out. Get used to being boring. I'll start with the vendor policy. It hasn't been rewritten in 7 years." He sat down, opened his laptop, and for the first time, I saw that this wasn't my story or my legacy, but a continuation. Someone had finally lifted the burden I had been carrying. That same week, I sat quietly in a compliance training session. Half the staff didn't even know I was in the room. A young professional stood up and said, "You know, I think this whole honesty thing is more important than I thought." And then he quoted something that sounded like me saying, "Honesty is not a checklist, it's a position." Not verbatim, but close enough. And I understood, it was starting to ring true. Not like a tile or a legend, but like part of the culture. Back in my office, I opened my email. Empty, calm. And that was good. Because I wasn't writing to provoke a reaction. I had left a reference point, a standard that they could rely on even after I was gone. That night, Andrea and I went out for the first time in months. Grilled elk, red wine. She asked, "Do you feel like it's over?" I thought about it. "No," I said, "but I feel like it's under control." She smiled. Under control is a good word. I realized I didn't need applause, signs, or unnecessary validation. I had Andrea. My name had regained its weight. And the truth, recorded in the systems, in people's minds, was finally in its place. Before leaving the restaurant, I looked at my phone. One unread message from Sandra. Just one sentence. That was the best resignation letter that ever came. I didn't answer. I just locked the screen and walked out into the night. No louder than ever, but certainly not invisible. 6 months had passed. The panorama outside my window hadn't changed. The same steel sky over downtown Chicago. But the atmosphere at Stratton Technologies had changed. The silence in the elevators no longer smelled of fear. It was respect. Not for me personally, but for the rules, for the silence itself, for the system. We had gone from reactions to reflection. And it cost arrests, lawsuits, losses. But it also took someone who didn't look away. And when the storm died down, people began to see again. Someone had attached a sign to the glass wall outside my office. I didn't ask who. It said, "Honesty is not a policy. It's a position." No signature, No name. I walked past it every morning, and my thoughts always nodded. Then they tried to give me the whole company. Not in direct words, but that was the gist. Robert is retiring, Sandra said one Thursday. The board wants you to be chairman. She stood in my office with a folder in her hands, as if it were some kind of disease. But it meant nothing to me. I'm not here to get a raise, I said. She waited, as if I might change my mind. But I had made up my mind years ago. I'm not for the corporate ladder. I'm here to stand guard. Some build bridges, others guard gates. I've come to terms with who I am. In my place, I suggested 2 candidates, Stephen to oversee the system, and a woman from compliance who, just a few months ago, had the audacity to challenge the approval of a vendor that everyone had accepted without question. Sandra just blinked. She was 29. I looked at her and thought, that's how old I was when I first started here. She didn't say anything else. I guess it was because she realized that it wasn't how long you'd been with the company that mattered, but what you noticed while you were there. In those last few weeks before I retired, I did something no one expected me to do. I held a class twice a week in a basement conference room that had been empty and smelled of damp for years. I called it System Integrity and Human Factors. No slides, no official newsletters, no HR announcements. Just a short message on the internal server. If you're wondering why the quiet man gets up before everyone else, grab some coffee and a question. Wednesday, 7:30, B-bottom. Only Stephen came first. Then Bethany from marketing. Later, I was a DevOps intern. And within 6 weeks, we had nowhere to put people. I never mentioned the scandal. I never named names. I just explained how it all got to that point. How I'll close my eyes just this once gradually turns into this is how we do it. And how one day you realize that you're no longer working for the company, but you've become a part of a lying machine. And the only way back is to tell the truth, even if you have to pay dearly for it. One morning after a lecture, I found a folded piece of paper on my desk. No name, no signature, just the words. I voted to remove you. I was wrong. I reread it 5 times. Not because I needed an apology, but because someone had dared to take off their armor. And that mattered more than any title on the board of directors. The house became quieter. Andrea planted tomatoes again. She said it helped her feel the ground beneath her feet. We didn't have to talk about the Stratton over dinner anymore. The load moved. But one evening, as we sat on the porch watching the fireflies, she asked, "Do you regret not leaving then?" I thought about it and said, "Every day." And then, after a pause, "But I'm glad I stayed." She smiled and took my hand. My last official day of work was Wednesday. I didn't make any announcements, just packed my things into the old leather bag I'd had since 1987. I left the cactus flower with Stephen, and I put my badge on the table, a bookmark for a chapter one never intended to reread again. I walked around the building one last time, not to say goodbye, but to remind myself. I was here, I was standing guard. In the lobby, the new receptionist, a young man named Andre, always in bow ties, waved at me. "I've been reading your seminars in the archives. You seem to be a legend." I smiled. Legends are those who haven't been asked about for a long time. I just stayed longer than others to finish what I started. A sharp wind was blowing outside, but it was honest. I didn't call a taxi, but walked, letting the cold seep into my bones. It was cleansing. I stopped past the former Stratton warehouse, now converted into the Blue Code coffee shop. The outlines of the old system logo were still barely visible on the brick, like a scar. And I realized, some things disappear, others fade, and some things remain underground until someone takes a closer look. At home, Andrea was already waiting. There were 2 glasses of bourbon on the table and something wrapped in a cloth. "I found it in the attic," she said. "It's my old compass, the one my dad gave me when I went to college. It's still scratched and dented, but the needle points." "I don't care if it's right," I said with a smile, "as long as it reminds me of how right used to feel." That night, I went outside. The sky was clear, the air still. My phone vibrated, a text from Stephen. A new employee asked, "What makes a system truly secure?" I answered in my mind, not in text. Not a code, not instructions. One that never turns away. I didn't text him back. I just looked up at the stars. They shone calmly, unchanging, beyond any edits or committees. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel forgotten. Not because I was remembered, but because I left a mark. A bridge. A line in the code. A silence that will echo long after my footsteps have faded from those corridors.